I never thought I'd have to arrest someone on my own land for calling the cops on me. But that's exactly what happened the morning HOA Karen decided my farm was her personal parking lot. One minute I was fixing a fence post under the cool sunrise. The next, a blinding white SUV blasted through my gate like she owned the place. Out steps a woman wrapped in pink polyester and entitlement sunglasses the size of satellites, voice sharp enough to slice barbed wire. She didn't ask. She didn't explain. She announced she'd be parking on my property because the HOA has authority over everything within a mile. When I told her to leave, she laughed. Then she slapped me. Then she called 911 and reported that I attacked her. The best part, she had no idea the man she was screaming at, the dangerous farmer she wanted arrested, was the sheriff of this entire county. And when the truth hit her, it hit hard. Before we jump into the full story, drop your location and local time in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more wild HOA drama. The sun was just starting to burn through the thin morning mist when everything went sideways. Most days on the farm start slow coffee in my thermos boots in the dirt and a quiet mental checklist of chores waiting to be done. There's a rhythm to it all, a simple honesty in watching your own hands shape the land you live on. After 2 decades out here, I've learned to value that rhythm more than anything. But peaceful mornings never survive long when you live next to an HOA. The subdivision beside my farm was relatively new. 3 years old, expensive, and full of people who moved out to experience country living without understanding that country living doesn't come with free upgrades or permission slips. They were the kind of folks who asked if cows smelled different in winter, the kind who thought tractors were loud for no reason, and worst of all, the kind who believed that their HOA gave them dominion over anything their eyes could see. From the moment the neighborhood broke ground, the board sent me letters about partnership opportunities. That was their polite way of saying, "We want to expand our playground onto your land." They wanted an easement here, access there, maybe a scenic trail cutting through my back pasture. Every letter got the same response: absolutely not. This was my land, my work, my responsibility, not some decorative accessory for bored suburban families. Most of the homeowners eventually got the message, but a few didn't. And one of them, the loudest, boldest, most self-appointed queen bee in the entire HOA hive, was a woman named Amber Hartley. Everyone else called her Karen behind her back, and honestly it suited her better than her legal name ever could. I'd had only one brief encounter with her before that morning. She'd shown up at my farm stand demanding a neighbor discount on organic eggs because my property value helps your business. I told her the hens didn't give discount eggs, and she left in a storm of perfume and profanity. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. On the morning everything unraveled, I was in the north pasture repairing a section of fence the storms had knocked loose. I could hear the goats milling around behind me, bleating impatiently for breakfast. The air smelled of wet soil and fresh grass, my favorite scent in the world. I was humming to myself when I heard the first warning sign, the crunch of tires approaching way too fast. Now my farm has a long gravel driveway leading from the county road up to the farm stand. After that point, the land turns private. Dirt paths branch off to the orchards, pastures, storage sheds, and equipment lots. The signs posted at each path aren't subtle. They're big, white, reflective, and clear: private property. No trespassing. Anyone with eyes and basic comprehension would understand. Apparently Amber had neither that morning. Her SUV didn't just enter the driveway, it flew through it. Dust billowed behind her like she was racing for a prize. She barreled past the farm stand, the parking signs, the fencing markers, and straight through the open gate, leading deeper onto the land. I dropped my tools immediately. No one got that far inside by accident. This was deliberate. I stepped into the lane, waving both arms to get her attention, but she didn't slow until she was practically on top of me. The SUV screeched, pelting my boots with loose gravel. When the window rolled down, I already knew what I was dealing with. "Excuse you," she snapped, as if I'd thrown myself in front of her for fun. "You almost made me spill my latte." She stepped out, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the frame. Her sunglasses were big enough to see their reflection in each other, and her lips were curled into a tight, irritated pout. "I'm going to need you to move," she said, pointing toward the open pasture behind me. "I'll be parking back there." It took me a moment to process what I'd just heard. "Back there," I repeated. "Yes," she huffed, as if explaining basic math. "Back there. The HOA is conducting a trails survey today. My committee is assessing future recreation zones. We'll be using this area." My jaw tensed. "This is private land," I said slowly. "You're not parking here. You're not surveying here. And your HOA has no jurisdiction on this property." Her laugh was loud enough to scare a bird off a fence post. "Oh, please, we're all part of the community. Your land is basically unused space. The HOA board agreed it would be ideal for a future walking trail. Future trail. On my land. Approved by people who didn't own an inch of it." I took a steady breath. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you once. Turn your vehicle around and leave the property." Her head jerked back like I'd insulted a deity. "Are you seriously trying to tell me what I can and can't do? I'm the HOA president? I make decisions for this entire area, for the subdivision I corrected, not the county, and definitely not my farm." She rolled her eyes, pushed past me, and started walking toward the pasture gate like I didn't exist. Her boots sank into the soft soil with every entitled step. She reached down, plucked a stem of clover from the ground, sniffed it, and tossed it like she was evaluating produce in a grocery aisle. "This area will be perfect," she mumbled. "We'll need clearing, maybe some gravel laid, but—" "Stop," I said, stepping in front of her again. "You're trespassing." She blinked twice. Then her expression twisted into something mean. "You don't know who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to, and I'm telling you again, leave." Another laugh, but this one was sharper. "You think some farmer can threaten me? Honey, I have influence. I'll get you fined. I'll get you evicted. I'll get your entire operation shut down." I felt the heat rise in my chest, not anger resolve. I'd heard plenty of threats in my line of work, but this one was especially ignorant. "Ma'am," I said quietly, "go back to your car." That's when she slapped me. A sharp, open-handed crack across my cheek. Out of nowhere. No warning. Just a raw, impulsive burst of rage. "Don't you dare tell me what to do," she shrieked. "I'll call the police and have you arrested for assault." I steadied myself, hand on my cheek. "You need to leave, right now." She stormed back to her SUV, jumped inside, and screeched the tires as she turned. But instead of heading back toward the road, she whipped the wheel and drove straight across the pasture, crushing a line of small saplings I'd planted last spring. The fence groaned as she clipped it with her bumper. I shouted after her, but she didn't stop. Dust rose behind her like a tornado as she grabbed her phone, screaming into it. Even from a distance, I could hear the words, "Help, I'm being attacked by a violent farmer, send the police." I didn't bother running after her. I didn't have to. Because if there's one thing HOA Karen didn't know, it's that the violent farmer she was reporting was the man who commanded every patrol unit in the county. And when she called 911, her report got routed straight to me. I watched her SUV disappear in a cloud of dust as she barreled toward the front of my property, still shouting into her phone like she was auditioning for a low-budget soap opera. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. After 20 years on this land, I knew every bend, every gate, every choke point. And I knew exactly where she'd end up, right back on the main driveway where the county road met my front entrance, and where she'd have nowhere left to run. I walked, not ran. I'd learned a long time ago that rushing only gives trouble more power than it deserves. By the time I reached the tool shed, the call finally came through on my radio. One of my deputies, Garcia, sounded half confused and half amused. "Sheriff, we got a 911 call reporting an assault at your farm." I could hear voices in the background, 2 other deputies already responding in their cruisers. "Let me guess," I replied, brushing dust off my hands. "A woman in a white SUV, blonde hair, acting like she owns the planet. That'd be her." Garcia sighed. "Claims a farmer attacked her. Says she fears for her life." "Is she still on scene?" "She's in the driveway screaming at Newman and Riley." A short pause. "Sir, she's telling them she's the president of something called the Heritage Oaks Executive Board." Of course that's what she'd say. I started walking toward the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots. "All right, let them know I'm on my way." Should I tell her you're the sheriff?" Garcia asked. "No," I said, almost smiling. "Let's save that for the grand finale." As I got closer, I could hear her long before I saw her, a shrill, panicked monologue echoing across the yard. Every sentence was louder than the last, every accusation more dramatic, the kind of voice that could curdle milk. "Officers, arrest him. He tried to strangle me. He stole my purse. He threatened my dog." She didn't have a dog, and she definitely didn't have a purse when she showed up. When I finally reached the driveway, the sight was almost comical. Deputies, Newman and Riley, stood stiff and expressionless, hands on their belts, doing everything in their power not to react. Karen paced in circles around them, waving her arms and pointing toward my farmhouse like she expected SWAT to descend from a helicopter. "Oh, thank God," she gasped, spotting me as I stepped through the fence gate. Another officer. "Finally, I have been assaulted. I have been violated. I was just doing my civic duty, and this barbaric maniac came after me. Newman opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. No need to interrupt the performance. She hadn't realized who I was yet, which made this even more entertaining. I let her rant for a few more seconds before I spoke. "Ma'am, why don't you explain exactly what happened?" She spun toward me like a malfunctioning weather vane. Finally, someone willing to listen. "I was conducting official HOA business, as is my right as president of the Heritage Oaks Board. This man, this violent lunatic, attacked me when I tried to inspect public land." I blinked slowly. "Public land? Yes," she snapped, planting her hands on her hips. "This whole place. It belongs to the community, which means I have full authority to assess its use. But this psychopath grabbed me and tried to stop me from doing my work." Newman and Riley exchanged glances. Sir Riley said, "We did find tire tracks leading across your pasture, and several damaged saplings." Karen gasped dramatically. "I had to escape. I feared for my life. I ignored her and turned to my deputies, and the gate bent inward," Newman said. "Like someone hit it with their bumper," Karen scoffed. "Oh, please. That old thing probably fell over in the wind." "It was reinforced steel," Newman muttered. I took a slow breath, letting silence hang in the air. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "do you have any proof of this alleged assault?" She reached up and touched her cheek. "Yes, he hit me. Look, it's practically bruised." Riley leaned in, squinting. "Ma'am, your cheek is sunburned." She jerked away. "Well, it would bruise if it could. My skin is very resilient." I nodded thoughtfully. "All right. And you said he grabbed you. With what hand?" "What does that matter?" she snapped. "Both all." "I was attacked by a raving brute. You came alone?" I asked. "Yes," she barked. "Because I am a responsible leader doing important work." I folded my arms. "And you entered the property through which gate?" She hesitated. The front one. The one with 3 giant "no trespassing" signs." Her lips twitched. "Those don't apply to me. I'm HOA. I have universal access." That was when Deputy Garcia arrived, stepping out of his cruiser with a clipboard and a look that said he had mentally checked out 10 minutes ago. "Sheriff," he said, "I brought the report forms." Karen's head snapped toward him. "Sheriff? What sheriff? Why do we need a sheriff?" I cleared my throat and took a few slow steps forward. "That would be me, ma'am." At first she didn't react. Her brain took a second to catch up to the words. But then her face twisted like she'd bitten a lemon dipped in battery acid. You're the sheriff." "Yes," I said, pulling the badge from my belt just enough for her to see. "Sheriff of Rockford County. And owner of this farm." The silence that followed was delicious. Her mouth opened and closed several times like she was trying to reboot herself. No, you're lying. This is harassment. This is a conspiracy. Deputies, arrest him." Newman scratched his head. "Ma'am, he's our boss." Karen staggered back, gripping the hood of her SUV. This can't be happening." I called 911. "I reported a crime." "Yes," I said. "A false report." "I was attacked." "You slapped me," I said plainly. "That was self-defense. You slapped me before anything happened." She sputtered. Well, I felt threatened." I pointed toward the pasture behind my house. "And the saplings you ran over, the fence you bent. That all self-defense too. That was an accident." "Ma'am," Riley said carefully. "You also admitted on camera," he gestured to his lapel, "that you came onto private land to conduct HOA business. That's not a crime." "It is if the land isn't in your HOA," I replied. "Which it's not. Which you knew, and which you ignored." Her face reddened. "I didn't ignore anything. I was reclaiming shared community resources." I shook my head slowly. "Ma'am, this is a farm. My farm. No part of it is shared with your subdivision. Your HOA holds 0 rights here." She looked around, desperate for anyone to take her side. "Officers," she pleaded, "he's lying. He has to be lying. Look at him. He's just a farmer. Just a farmer," I repeated quietly. The deputies shifted uncomfortably. Even they didn't like where this was going. "Ma'am," I said at last, "you're under arrest for trespassing, destruction of private property, filing a false police report, and assault." She froze. Her hands rose slowly, tremblingly, like she still couldn't believe any of this was real. "No," she whispered, voice cracking. "You can't do this. I'm HOA. I'm important." "That's your problem," I said. "You think being HOA gives you power over everyone else. It doesn't give you power here." Riley stepped forward and gently took her wrist. "Ma'am, please turn around." She resisted at first. "You're all making a huge mistake. I will have my lawyers end you. I will have the board ruin your career. You can't arrest me. I'm a community leader." But the deputies were patient, firm, professional. And finally, with a defeated groan, she turned. The cuffs clicked. She gasped, horrified. This is humiliation. This is an outrage. No, I said quietly. This is consequence. Karen was escorted into the back of Riley's cruiser, still ranting about rights and influence, even as the door shut. Her voice sounded smaller now, less powerful, more like a balloon losing air. I stood there for a long moment, letting the adrenaline drain out of me. The goats bleated behind the fence. The wind rustled through the grasses. The world settled back into itself. Finally, Newman approached me. "You all right, Sheriff?" "Yeah," I said, rubbing my cheek where the slap had landed. "Hurts a little, but I've had worse." He nodded toward the pasture. "Want us to document the damage?" "Yeah," I said. "Let's make sure this goes on record start to finish." And as they headed off to photograph the gate, the tire tracks, the broken saplings, I allowed myself one small, satisfied smile. HOA Karen had come onto my land swinging her imaginary authority like a sword. But today reality swung back. Deputy Riley's cruiser rolled down the driveway with Karen still howling from the back seat, her voice fading into the distance like a wounded animal that couldn't decide whether it wanted pity or power. I stood there breathing in the settling dust as the morning sun climbed over the tree line. The farm went quiet again, eerily quiet, like the land itself was waiting for my next move. I headed toward the crushed saplings first. They were young apple trees, third-generation grafts, special cultivars I'd spent years developing for flavor and hardiness. Seeing them flattened under the tracks of Karen's SUV made something deep in my chest tighten. Not anger, no, that emotion burned too quickly. This was something slower, heavier, the sinking disappointment of watching someone destroy something they didn't even bother to appreciate. Newman and Garcia followed behind, documenting everything with cameras. I pointed out damage as we walked. "She hit the deer fencing right here," I said, kneeling beside the bent wire. "Clipped it hard enough to shear the bottom staples." Garcia whistled. "Sheriff, she really didn't care where that SUV went, did she?" "People like her don't see land," I said. "They see background, decoration. Everything's theirs until someone tells them it's not." Newman crouched and snapped another photo. "You want to press charges for all of this?" "I will," I said, without hesitation. "Every last thing she damaged, and the false report, and the assault." Garcia raised an eyebrow. "You think she'll plead it out, she'll fight it," I said. "People like her always fight. They think consequences are optional." I straightened, brushing dirt off my knees. In the distance, the goats bleated again, hungry, confused, probably wondering why breakfast was late. Life on a farm doesn't pause for drama. Animals still need feeding fences, still need fixing machines, still need oiling. But part of me couldn't move on yet. Something about this incident gnawed at me. The brazenness, the entitlement, the absolute conviction that she was allowed to do whatever she wanted because she belonged to an HOA. It reminded me of something that had happened about a year earlier. The HOA had sent me a letter, formal, typed, stamped, and signed by 3 members of the board. They wanted to partner with me to provide expanded community amenities. Their proposal: A, walking trail around the perimeter of my pasture, a small community playground in the unused corner of the property, and my personal favorite, a shared garden space where HOA residents could plant and harvest crops under the guidance of community leadership. I'd laughed the first time I read it, then I'd read it 3 more times just to make sure it wasn't parody. I sent a polite but firm response. "This land is not and will never be part of your HOA. Stay off my property." They didn't like that. Within a month, I'd gotten 2 complaints about farm smells, one about tractor noise, and one lengthy email accusing me of endangering property values by maintaining livestock too close to residential lots. All nonsense, but just official enough to become annoying. And then there was the incident with the kids from the subdivision who wandered onto my land to pet the cows, despite 3 visible signs saying the cattle were breeding bulls. I'd returned them safely, of course, but I'd warned the parents your kids could have been seriously hurt. Their response: "You should have fenced your animals better. Never mind that the animals were fenced perfectly. Their kids had climbed over it." That was the first time I thought, this HOA is going to be a problem someday. And now here we were. I left the deputies to finish the inspection and walked back toward the farmhouse to grab my phone. I wanted to start the paperwork immediately while the details were fresh, but halfway down the driveway I saw a familiar pickup truck rumbling toward me. It was old Hank Delaney, my neighbor on the west side, retired Army widower, grumpy as a mule but solid as bedrock. He leaned out the window before the truck even stopped. "Heard shouting," Hank said. "What happened? Sounded like a goose fight and a car crash had a baby." I chuckled. "HOA president trespassed, assaulted me." ran over some trees, called the cops. Hank stared at me a long moment. Then he burst into laughter so loud the crows took off from the fence posts. She called the cops on you. She didn't know who I was. I bet she does now. He slapped the outside of his door, wheezing from laughter. Lord have mercy. You need help fixing the fence. I won't say no. Well, hell, let me park and grab my gloves. The two of us worked side by side for the next half hour, straightening the bent metal and resetting the posts. Hank grumbled the whole time, which meant he was in a good mood. These HOA people, he muttered, tightening a bolt. Move out here for peace and quiet, then complain the countryside is too country. I nodded. They want the view without the reality. They want control. Hank corrected. They want to play Queen of the Prairie. That one definitely does. I told him the full story, every detail from the slap to the false report to her meltdown when she learned I was the sheriff. Hank stopped mid-swing with his hammer. She slapped you, oh yeah, but you didn't know. He shook his head slowly. Your self-control's a hell of a lot better than mine. I smiled slightly. Part of the badge. We finished the fence repair and stood back to admire the work. The morning mist had burned off fully now. Sunlight rolled across the pasture in long, warm stripes. Birds hopped along the fence rail. The land calmed itself naturally, as if smoothing the wrinkles left behind by a storm. That's when my radio crackled again. Sheriff came, Riley's voice. We've transported the suspect to county. You want us to hold her in intake or move her straight to booking? Put her in holding until I get there, I said. You planning to interview her yourself? He asked. Yes, I said quietly. She needs to understand exactly what she did, Hank snorted. Give her hell, Sheriff. And if you need a witness about her barreling through your gate like a drunk hippo, I'm your man. I appreciate it. He waved his hand. You keep this county safe. Least I can do is tell the truth when an idiot runs wild. I headed to the farmhouse to grab my keys, but before I reached the door, something glinted in the sunlight beside the porch. I bent down to inspect it. It was a small decorative HOA badge, probably a brooch or pin she wore on her blazer before it fell off during her melodramatic performance. I picked it up, brushed off the dirt, and turned it over in my palm. HOA. President, Heritage Oaks, gold-plated. Overly polished. Overly proud. A symbol of the authority she thought she had over everyone and everything. I slipped it into my pocket. I might need that later. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. The old diesel rumbled to life, comforting as a heartbeat. As I pulled onto the main road, I thought about everything that had led up to this years of ignoring boundaries, pretending power, where there was none, escalating every disagreement into a confrontation. People like Karen didn't understand simple lines, not on maps, not in the dirt, not between right and wrong. They only understood the limits after they crashed straight into them. The county sheriff's office sat a few miles down the road, a modest brick building with a flag post out front and a couple of cruisers lined up. I parked in my usual spot and stepped inside. Deputy Riley was waiting near the front desk. She's in holding, he said, still yelling. Lost her voice once, got it back, and started yelling again. I sighed. Let's get this over with. Riley buzzed me through the security door, and we walked down the hallway toward the holding cells. Each step echoed off the concrete floor. The low hum of fluorescent lights vibrated faintly above us. When we reached the holding area, I saw her through the reinforced glass. Karen sat on the bench, arms crossed, hair messy, her blazer wrinkled. She looked less like a president and more like a ruffled pigeon caught in the rain. She saw me and leapt to her feet. You, she shrieked. You are making a massive mistake. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. I folded my hands behind my back and stepped up to the glass. And I'm the county sheriff, I said calmly. Which outranks HOA president by, well, infinitely. She slammed her palms against the glass. I demand to be released immediately. I will sue you. I will sue your deputies. I will own this entire building when I'm done. I let her scream for another 10 seconds. Then I spoke slowly and firmly. Ma'am, you are going to answer for the crimes you committed on my land. Her mouth trembled. Your land. That's right, I said. And for the first time today, you're going to listen. She backed up a step, her confidence wavering. You can't talk to me like that. I can, I said, and I will. Because the law applies to everyone, including HOA royalty. Her jaw clenched. This isn't how it's supposed to go, she whispered. It's exactly how it goes, I replied. When someone finally tells you no. She didn't scream after that. She didn't slap. She didn't threaten. She just stared. For the first time since I'd met her, she was silent. And in that silence I saw something flicker behind her eyes, not remorse, not yet, but something close to fear. fear of real consequences. And for someone like her, that was brand new. I stayed on the other side of the glass for a moment, letting her quiet settle between us. Silence can be a tool. It gives people space to think or space to panic. In Karen's case, it was definitely the latter. She fiddled with the buttons on her blazer, smoothed her hair, straightened the hem, then smoothed her hair again, like she was trying to reassemble the illusion of control she'd lost on my driveway. When I finally unlocked the door and stepped into the holding cell, she retreated to the far wall. For the first time since I'd met her, she didn't look like a queen addressing peasants. She looked like a cornered animal. "Sit," I said calmly, motioning to the bench. "I'll stand," she snapped, but the crack in her voice betrayed the edge she was losing. "Suit yourself." I folded my arms and leaned against the wall opposite her. "Let's talk about what happened this morning." She glared at me, then turned her head dramatically, refusing to make eye contact. "This is harassment," she muttered. "Pure harassment. I didn't do anything wrong." "You trespassed on private property," I said. "You ignored posted signs. You damaged fencing, crushed multiple young trees, filed a false police report, and assaulted me." Her face hardened. "I did not assault you. You slapped me," I reminded her. "That was a reflex," she said. "And you got in my way. And you grabbed me. You grabbed my arm. You were walking deeper onto my land after I told you to leave." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You can't tell an HOA president to leave anywhere. I have the right to inspect community-accessible land, which my land is not." "It should be," she fired back. "And that," I said slowly, "is the real problem, isn't it?" Her jaw clenched like she'd just been exposed during a game of cards she thought she'd been winning. "You believe you have authority wherever you decide you should," I continued. "On people's land and people's lives. You think a title makes you untouchable. It does make me. It doesn't," I cut in. She bit her lip, frustrated. "You're twisting this. You're only doing this because you're biased against me." I raised an eyebrow. "Biased? Yes, you don't like HOA leadership. People like you never do. You all think we're bossy. You think we're controlling. You are controlling," I said calmly. "That's not bias. That's observation." She let out a furious huff. "You don't understand what it's like. I have responsibilities. I have an entire neighborhood relying on me." "No," I said. "They have complaints they want someone to handle. You made yourself the queen because you like the crown." Her face twitched. I sat down on the bench and gestured again for her to sit. She hesitated, then finally moved to the opposite corner of the bench as far from me as she could manage without falling off. "Karen," I began slowly, "tell me honestly, what made you think you had the right to come onto my property today?" Her lips parted. For a second she seemed ready to shout the usual nonsense. But then something shifted, maybe exhaustion, maybe fear, maybe the realization that the sheriff title wasn't one she could shout over. She sighed. "Our board wants to expand," she said quietly. "We're trying to improve resident amenities, a trail system, maybe a recreational area, and your land is just there, sitting, doing nothing but growing plants and grass." I stared at her. She seemed genuinely confused by the idea that farmland was not doing nothing. "What did you think would happen?" I asked. "That you'd march onto my property, point at a spot, and I'd say, 'What? Sure, tear it up, it's all yours.' I thought you'd understand," she said. "Understand what that community matters," she snapped again. "That people need outdoor space, that I'm trying to make the neighborhood better." "By stealing land?" I asked. She glared at me. "It wasn't stealing. It wasn't yours." Silence again. Only this time she didn't break it with yelling. She stayed quiet long enough for me to see something I hadn't expected: embarrassment. Not guilt, not yet, but embarrassment. Maybe for the first time in her life, her actions had led her somewhere she couldn't talk her way out of. I decided to push gently, not aggressively. "How long have you been HOA president?" I asked. 2 years, she said. "I won by 72% of the vote." "And how many people ran?" "Just me," she muttered. I nodded. "So you volunteered. You took the job. And you've been trying to shape everything around you ever since." "Someone has to lead," she said stiffly. "There's a difference," I said, "between leading and lording." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I continued. "Karen, no one is above the law, not even HOA presidents, especially not HOA presidents." She stared at her shoes. "I'm not out to ruin your life," I added, surprising myself with how honest that sounded. "But I am going to enforce the law. And you crossed a line today. Multiple lines." Her shoulders slumped slightly. "What's going to happen to me?" "You'll be charged," I said. "There'll be a court hearing, fines, possibly probation. The assault charge might stick depending on what the judge decides." Her breath caught. Will I go to jail?" "For the assault, maybe. For everything combined, possibly a short time. But it depends on your behavior moving forward. She swallowed hard. In my HOA position, I'm not involved in HOA politics, I said. But I can't imagine your neighbors will stay quiet when they hear what happened. That hit her. I could see it. Her face twisted with horror, not at the legal consequences, but at the idea of her reputation collapsing. I was trying to help, she whispered bitterly. I was trying to do something good. Good intentions don't excuse illegal actions, I replied. Especially when those intentions are mixed with personal ego. She flinched. I didn't soften it. Sometimes people need the full truth to sink in. After a long pause, she asked, "What happens now? You stay here until processing is complete. Then you get a hearing date. You hire an attorney, or you get a public defender. Then you answer for what you did. And what about you?" she asked nervously. "Are you going to be testifying?" "I'll be presenting all the evidence," I said. Everything, the deputies documented. A beat of silence passed between us. Finally, she whispered something I didn't expect. "I didn't think it mattered. What I didn't think my actions mattered," she said quietly. "I didn't think anyone would care. I didn't think someone like you would stand up to me." "Someone like me?" I asked. "A farmer," she said, almost apologetically. I thought I could push people around. I've been doing it for years. At least you're honest now." She let out a broken laugh. "It's the only thing I've got left." I pushed off the wall and stood. "Karen, the charges will move forward. But what you choose to do from here, how you act, how you apologize, how you take responsibility, that will shape what happens next." She nodded, tiny, defeated, but genuine. "I will cooperate," she murmured. "Good." I didn't promise leniency. I wouldn't. But I also didn't need to crush her. Life was already doing that for me. I stepped toward the door, unlocked it, and paused with my hand on the frame. "For what it's worth," I said, without turning around, "you're not the first person who let authority get to their head, and you won't be the last." She whispered something behind me, too soft to catch, but her tone had changed completely. When I stepped out of the holding cell and closed the door, Riley looked up from the desk. "Well?" he asked. "How'd it go?" She finally stopped yelling. I said, "That bad?" "No," I murmured, "just real. For the first time today." He nodded. "You gonna file the charges now?" "Yeah," I said. "Let's get it done." We walked together toward the report room, and as I sat down, pen in hand, preparing to document everything she'd done, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe today wasn't just about stopping Karen. Maybe it was about teaching her the one lesson she'd never learned: you can't bulldoze your way through other people's lives. Not on my land. Not in my county. Not ever. I spent the next 2 hours completing paperwork, reviewing body cam footage, and ensuring every detail of the incident was recorded accurately and thoroughly. It's easy to think law enforcement just arrests people and walks away, but the truth is, the real work happens after the cuffs click. Reports, evidence, documentation, a dozen signatures and timestamps. Without that, a case falls apart before it even reaches a judge. By the time I finished, the adrenaline had worn off. The slap on my cheek stung dully, but the sharp heat had faded. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm station coffee thick enough to varnish a fence post and took a long breath. The office hummed around me, phones ringing keyboards, clacking radios, squawking with calls from around the county. Just as I was about to return to the holding area, Deputy Newman stepped in. "Sheriff," he said, holding a clipboard, "we've processed the damage estimate for your property. Let's see it." He handed me the sheet. Broken fencing, crushed saplings, uprooted netting, soil compaction damage, estimated cleanup hours, labor cost, replacement cost, everything totaled neatly. I let out a low whistle. "She did more damage than I realized. Couple thousand at least," Newman said. "And that's being conservative. It'll all go through the court. That's what we figured." He hesitated. "Sir, there's another thing." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Her HOA has already called the station. Twice." I rubbed my forehead. "Of course they did. What did they say?" "That her arrest is a misunderstanding. That they expect her immediate release. That the sheriff," he paused here, lips twitching, "has been misled." I snorted. "They'll learn soon enough." Newman nodded. "Thought you'd want to know. They're not giving up." "HOAs never do," I muttered. "Power tastes too good." When he left, I took another drink of the bitter coffee and walked down the hall toward the holding area. The temperature always felt colder back there, sterile, quiet sterile in a way even hospitals couldn't replicate. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. A deputy I didn't recognize glanced up and nodded respectfully as I passed. Karen sat alone in the cell, her earlier fury drained into a tight, simmering resentment. Her hair had fallen limp around her cheeks, her mascara smudged lightly beneath her eyes. She looked less like the immovable HOA queen, and more like someone realizing that her throne was made of cardboard. When she saw me, she straightened, attempting to regain some semblance of composure. "Are you releasing me now?" she demanded, though her voice wavered. "No," I replied. "I'm here to inform you about the next steps." She folded her arms, though the gesture was more defensive than confident. "I already told your deputies everything. I wasn't trespassing, I was conducting community business. That's not how the law views it." "The law is wrong," she snapped, then quickly added, "I mean, it's being misinterpreted." I stepped closer, hands clasped behind my back. "Karen, you drove onto private property. You ignored posted signs. You inflicted property damage. You slapped me. And you made a false emergency report." She looked away. I said I was scared. "You said a lot of things," I replied. "None of them true." Her jaw clenched. "Everything I did was in the interest of improving the neighborhood." "That's where you're mistaken," I said. "Your neighborhood ends at your property line. My land isn't part of it." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Says the sheriff who thinks he's above everyone." I raised an eyebrow. "You think being sheriff makes me feel above the law? If anything, it binds me to it more than anyone else. My actions are scrutinized. My record is public. My integrity matters." She scoffed. "Integrity is overrated. Is that what you tell your board members?" I asked. Her nostrils flared. "My board respects me. They think you're loud enough to defend them," I said. "There's a big difference." She glared at me like she wanted to throw every HOA violation she'd ever written at my forehead. "You made a choice this morning," I continued. "Not an accident. A decision. You believed your authority extended past property boundaries, past laws, past consequences." "I was acting on behalf of the community," she repeated again, a little weaker than before. "No," I said. "You were acting on behalf of your ego." Her eyes flickered. I kept going. "You want to know why I didn't arrest you immediately on my driveway? Because I wanted you to see what authority truly looks like. It's not loud. It's not entitled. It's not about forcing people to bow down." I leaned forward slightly, meeting her eyes dead on. "It's about responsibility." For the first time, she didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She didn't fling accusations like confetti. She just listened. "Responsibility," I repeated, "means knowing the limits of your power. And today you cross those limits like they weren't even painted on the ground." She dropped her gaze. I didn't think it mattered. That's the exact thought that leads people into handcuffs. Silence again. Heavy. Almost suffocating. Finally, she whispered, "What happens to me now?" "You'll go before a judge," I said. "You'll hear the charges. You'll get a lawyer. The evidence will be presented. And the court will decide. And the HOA? That's not my business," I said. "But I imagine your neighbors won't appreciate being dragged into a legal mess because of your decisions." Her eyes widened real fear this time. The idea of losing power terrified her more than losing freedom. "I didn't mean to cause all this," she said softly. "You did," I corrected gently. "You just didn't expect consequences." She seemed to collapse, inward shoulders, curling chin, tucking the weight of everything, finally sinking through her perfect facade. I gave her a moment. Then I said, "Karen, I want you to think about something." She glanced up warily. "Imagine if everyone acted the way you did today. If every person decided they had personal authority to take what they wanted, ignore boundaries, and call the police whenever they didn't get their way. That's chaos," she muttered. "Exactly," I said. "Because authority without accountability isn't leadership, it's abuse." Her lips tightened. "You're saying I'm abusive. I'm saying your behavior is," I said. "But behaviors can change, if you're willing." She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I don't know how to undo all this." "You start," I said, "by taking responsibility." A long silence passed. Then softly, almost reluctantly, she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't respond at first." Not because I doubted her sincerity, but because something surprising pulled at me, a small flicker of compassion. Not for what she'd done, but for the realization that she'd spent years building herself on top of sand, and now the tide had come in. "You'll have a chance to say that to the judge," I finally said. She nodded. I turned toward the door, unlocking it carefully. As I stepped out into the hallway, Riley approached. "How'd it go?" he asked. "She's calming down," I replied. "Reality's settling in." He nodded, lowering his voice. "Sheriff, you're not going to believe this, but the HOA president's vice chair is in the lobby. Says he wants to file, a formal complaint." I blinked. Against who you, Riley said. I almost laughed. Of course he is. Riley lifted a hand. But that's not the crazy part. He's also asking if we can release Karen immediately for HOA emergency business. Says the whole board is in crisis mode. I sighed. Let me guess. They need her signature for something. Apparently a landscaping variance, Riley said. Urgent, they said. I shook my head. Tell them she's unavailable. Unavailable how? She's busy learning what the word boundary means. Riley snorted. Want me to send them away? Yes, I said. And remind them that we don't negotiate with HOAs. He saluted jokingly. With pleasure, sir. As I walked back toward my office, fatigue settled into my bones. But it wasn't the kind of exhaustion that drags you down, it was the kind that follows a day where justice actually meant something. I sat at my desk pen tapping on the wood, staring at the damage report Newman had given me. The numbers didn't bother me. What mattered was the principle. Private land isn't a suggestion. Boundaries aren't optional. And respect isn't negotiable. Not on my farm, not in my county, not under my badge. When I stepped back into my office, the building felt heavier than normal, not because of the weight of the case, but because I could sense the tension vibrating through every wall. Incidents involving the HOA always traveled fast, faster than any speeding ticket or bar fight ever could. And Karen wasn't just any HOA member, she was the queen of that hive, the one who held monthly meetings like royal councils, and sent emails with more capital letters than actual sentences. I hadn't been sitting more than 30 seconds before my desk phone lit up. Not my cell. Not the radio, the landline, the one only officials, lawyers, and people with too much free time used. I answered. Sheriff speaking. A frantic voice fired back. Sheriff, this is Howard Brintley, Vice Chair of the Heritage Oaks HOA. We need to discuss the wrongful arrest of our president. Of course. Mr. Brintley, I said, evenly your president was arrested on multiple charges, none of them wrongful. You don't understand, he said, breathless. Karen is vital to our operations. She is the backbone of our compliance committee, the head of our beautification panel, the coordinator for our annual spring showcase. Mr. Brintley, I said, cutting gently. She trespassed. She assaulted an officer. She filed a false report. He paused. Then he added, almost whispering, but she's HOA president. I'm aware, I replied. But your HOA position doesn't override state law. Silence. A strained, horrified silence. Then, do you think the judge will consider her leadership role when deciding punishment? I leaned back, rubbing the bridge of my nose. The judge will consider the facts. Well, he sputtered, in that case we'd like to formally request she be released. Immediately. We have urgent board business tonight. She's not being released, I said simply. This is unacceptable, he fumed. We need her. You need a new president, I replied. He inhaled sharply. Is that a threat? It's advice. He sputtered incoherently and I politely ended the call. The moment I hung up, the phone rang again. Different number. I ignored it. Rang again. Then my email pinged, and pinged, and pinged. I could practically feel the HOA board spamming every inbox they could find. They were persistent, annoyingly persistent, but persistence wasn't power. Not here. I stood, stretched my back, and made my way toward the evidence room. My deputies were already preparing the sealed bags, Karen's blazer pin samples of the crushed trees, images of tire tracks, and, of course, the body cam footage. Sheriff Garcia asked, as he scribbled notes, You think this'll make headlines? Probably, I said. HOA drama always does. He shook his head. Never figured someone would be dumb enough to call the cops on the sheriff himself. They don't look at me and see a badge, I said. They look at me and see a barrier. He chuckled. Oh, she hit the wrong barrier. I walked through the station checking on things, making sure everyone had what they needed. But as the minutes passed, a nagging thought kept nibbling at the back of my mind. Something Karen said earlier, I didn't think it mattered. Why didn't it matter? What made her so absolutely sure that what she wanted outweighed everything else? Maybe answers were waiting back in the holding area, so I went. She was sitting on the bench again, hands clasped, staring at the gray cement floor. The fight in her posture had lessened, not gone, but muted like a storm settling into a drizzle. When she heard the door unlock, she lifted her head slowly. What now? She asked, exhausted. I want you to explain something, I said, stepping inside. You said earlier that you didn't think what you did would matter. Why? She let out a shaky breath. Because... She hesitated. Because people never stop me. People, I asked. Or your HOA members. She gave a small, humorless smile. Same thing. I sat down opposite her. Tell me. She hesitated again, then finally spoke. You know what it's like living in those neighborhoods? Everyone wants something. A rule changed, a neighbor punished, a lawn corrected, a fence painted. They don't want to deal with it themselves, so they vote someone else to handle it. Someone loud, someone who won't hesitate to enforce things. You, I said. She nodded. I started small. Parking enforcement, noise complaints, trash can violations. Her eyes unfocused, lost in memory. Then people wanted more. They wanted dogs restricted. Garden layouts approved. Fence colors standardized. They wanted everything perfect, uniform, predictable, and they wanted me to be the one to fix it. So you did, I said. And every time I pushed a little harder, she admitted no one pushed back. Not once. Not even when I fined the Johnsons for their mailbox, not matching the neighborhood aesthetic. That doesn't give you the right to control people's land, I said. I know, she snapped suddenly, then immediately deflated. I know, she repeated softly. But after a while, you start thinking your decisions are always justified, even when they're not. Her voice lowered, especially when they're not. I studied her carefully. Beneath the layers of entitlement and arrogance sat a simple truth: she'd been playing queen too long. And when you wear a crown for years, you forget it's not real. Karen, I said gently, you stepped onto my land like it already belonged to you. She winced. I know. You told my deputies the HOA had jurisdiction over the surrounding mile. Someone on the board told me that, once, she muttered. I didn't check. I didn't question it. And you slapped me. She swallowed hard. I'm aware. And then you filed a false police report. She covered her face with her hands. I panicked. I let the moment breathe. Then I said, take responsibility. That's the first step. She lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from the emotional fatigue of someone who'd built their identity on control and was now watching it crumble. I don't know how, she whispered. You start, I said, by facing what you did, not running from it. She nodded slowly. Your hearing is scheduled for tomorrow, I continued. You'll appear before Judge Hargreaves. Fear flashed in her eyes. She hates HOA cases. She hates abuse of authority, I corrected. And she'll hear the full record. Karen swallowed again. Is there anything I can do to make it less severe? Cooperate. Apologize. Make amends. Show the court you understand what you did. She nodded, trembling faintly. I stood. I need to return to my office. You'll be processed for the night. As I turned toward the door, she spoke again, her voice small. Sheriff, will the community find out? Yes, I said honestly. It'll be public record. Her shoulders sagged. And the HOA? She asked weakly. That's for them to decide, I said. But I don't imagine they'll want a president with criminal charges. She closed her eyes as if that reality hurt more than the entire legal process. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door gently behind me. Riley met me as I walked back toward the main area. How's she doing? Finally realizing she's not invincible, I said. He scratched his neck awkwardly. Sir, I don't want to overstep, but you handled that better than most would. She slapped you, wrecked your property, lied to our faces. I didn't handle her for her sake, I said. I handled her for the sake of justice, and the county, and every other person she's bullied. Riley nodded. Still, I've seen officers lose their temper over far less. That's why I said earlier, I said, authority isn't meant to be a weapon. As I walked back into my office, the station phone started ringing again. I didn't bother answering, let the HOA leave voicemails until their voices went hoarse. I sat, stretched my shoulders, and exhaled slowly. This wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time since the chaos began, things were moving in the right direction. For the farm, for the county, maybe even for Karen. And tomorrow, when the judge saw the evidence, the real reckoning would begin. The night passed quietly for most of the county, but not for me. Even after 20 years wearing a badge, I never quite get used to the nights before a court hearing, especially one involving someone who thinks the rules were written for everyone except themselves. I stayed late in my office, going through every piece of evidence again, ensuring everything was airtight. The body cam footage was clear. The photos of the crushed saplings were undeniable. The fence damage was unmistakable. And Karen's own recorded statements, her insisting she had universal HOA authority and was reclaiming community land, were the final nails in her own coffin. But still, a small part of me wondered how she'd show up in court. Contrite, defiant, or trying to spin the story into a dramatic monologue about community values. By sunrise, I'd made the decision to attend the hearing personally. I wanted to be there not just because I was the victim, but because she needed to see that standing up for your land and your rights meant something. When I arrived at the courthouse, the parking lot already looked like a scene from a reality show. A group of HOA board members clustered near the steps, whispering intensely. Some recognized me immediately. They turned stiff, awkward, unsure whether to greet me or glare at me. A few offered tight, polite nods. But one, a tall, balding man with a clip-on tie and permanent frown, marched straight toward me. "You're Sheriff Miller," he demanded. "The one who arrested our president." I nodded. "That would be me." He puffed his chest like a pigeon in mating season. "This is a gross misuse of power. Karen was acting in the best interest of the community. By trespassing on private land," I asked. "That land should have been community accessible," he snapped. "And yet I said it isn't." He blinked, stunned by the simple logic. "Let me explain something," I continued, lowering my voice. "Being part of an HOA does not make you part of the county government, and your authority does not extend past your property lines." He looked ready to argue again, but one of the other board members tugged his sleeve. "Howard," she whispered, harshly, "stop. You're embarrassing us." The courtroom doors opened, and we filed inside. A few local residents had come out of curiosity. HOA drama has a way of attracting spectators like moths to a porch light. Karen was escorted into the courtroom a few minutes later. Gone was the polished pink blazer and oversized sunglasses. She wore a county-issued jumpsuit and looked smaller, deflated, like someone whose entire world had collapsed overnight. When her eyes found mine, she froze. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. But instead she straightened, drew a shaky breath, and took her seat beside her attorney, a weary public defender who looked like he'd had one too many clients who believed themselves invincible. Judge Hargreaves entered with her usual stern authority. She was a no-nonsense, sharp-witted woman with a reputation for seeing through excuses the way a wolf sees through a thin-branched tree. "Calling the matter of State versus Karen Hartley," she said. "Charges include trespassing, destruction of private property, filing a false police report, and assault against a law enforcement officer." The room buzzed. Even the HOA vice chair flinched when he heard the word assault. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at Karen. "Miss Hartley, how do you plead to these charges?" Karen's lawyer whispered urgently to her. Her jaw trembled. Finally she croaked, "Guilty." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Even I felt a flicker of surprise. Judge Hargreaves leaned back. "That is unexpected. Your attorney is certain you understand the consequences." Karen nodded miserably. Her lawyer added, "Your Honor, Miss Hartley wishes to make a statement." "All right," the judge said. "Proceed." Karen stood slowly, like standing required effort, and turned toward the judge. But her eyes flickered to me, then to the small audience behind her, then back, and she broke. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but honestly. "I was wrong," she said. Her voice wavered like a radio with a loose antenna. I thought I was doing what was best for my community, but I let that idea twist into something else, something selfish." The courtroom was silent. "I didn't respect boundaries," she continued. "I didn't respect the law. I didn't respect other people. I acted like my authority mattered more than anyone else's rights." Her voice cracked, and it doesn't. She swallowed hard, blinking away a tear. "I'm sorry," she said, turning toward me. "Sheriff, I'm truly sorry. Not because I was caught, but because I finally understand what I did." I held her gaze and gave a small, respectful nod. I wasn't moved by sentiment, but by sincerity. And for the first time, she sounded sincere. Judge Hargreaves cleared her throat. "Thank you for your statement, Miss Hartley. Now let's proceed to sentencing." The judge reviewed the evidence for a solid 10 minutes, asking targeted questions, verifying details. Then she gave her verdict. "Miss Hartley," she said, "you let authority go to your head in a harmful and dangerous way. However, you have shown remorse today. So here is the court's decision." Karen stiffened. "You will pay full restitution for the property damage. You will perform 90 days of community service. You will be fined for the false report. And you will attend a mandatory course on conflict resolution and public accountability." Karen exhaled shakily. And finally, the judge added, "You are barred from holding any leadership position within your HOA for the next 2 years. The gasp that erupted from the HOA board members was louder than anything Karen herself had said all day. The judge hammered her gavel. Next case. Karen was escorted out of the courtroom. And as she passed me, she paused. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The moment was complete without words. Outside the courthouse, the HOA members were already arguing among themselves. "This is your fault, Howard," one woman hissed. "You backed her every decision," another snapped. "You said the sheriff would back down," someone shouted. I slipped past them, heading toward my truck. The noise faded behind me, replaced by the warm quiet of the mid-morning breeze. I drove home slowly, letting the scenery settle something inside me. My farm appeared over the crest of the hill, fence-repaired fields wide open, the goats grazing lazily like nothing unusual had happened. When I parked, I grabbed my hat from the dash and walked toward the pasture. The sunlight filtered through the orchard rows, illuminating the spaces where the crushed saplings had been. Soon they'd be replanted. Life grows back. Land heals. And sometimes, so do people. I checked the north fence, fed the animals, and took a long breath of clean country air, the kind of air that resets your lungs and your mind. Later that afternoon, I found a letter taped to my farm stand door. No HOA logo this time, just plain paper folded neatly. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were 3 words: "I'm truly sorry." Karen. I stood there for a long moment, letting the weight of that sit. People make mistakes. Big ones, ego-driven ones, hurtful ones. But taking responsibility, that's where real change begins. And as the sun dipped low across the pasture, casting long golden shadows between the orchard trees, I felt something I didn't expect. Closure. Real, solid, earned closure. At the end of the day, boundaries matter, not just the ones marked by fences or property lines, but the ones we draw in our behavior, our relationships, and our sense of right and wrong. Karen let authority blind her, and it cost her everything she thought she controlled. But when she finally faced the truth, she took responsibility, and sometimes that's the hardest thing any of us can do. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, a toxic neighbor, or someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them, you know how exhausting it can feel. But remember, protecting your rights isn't selfish. Standing your ground isn't aggressive. Respecting others doesn't mean letting them step all over you. I hope this story reminds you that justice still matters, and decency still matters, even when the world feels loud with entitlement. If you learned something or felt something from this story, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more wild HOA tales. And as always, tap the link and watch the full video. And if you're not sure where to watch it, just click the title above.